You're listening to Unlocking Our Sound Heritage and Voices from the Second World War, brought to you by Manx National Heritage, the charity responsible for the Isle of Man's natural and cultural heritage. The sound recordings you'll hear today and throughout this series on Manx Radio are part of a unique collection of around 600 sound recordings digitised from the Manx National Heritage Sound Archive and available now online for the first time. The team at Manx National Heritage hope you enjoy eavesdropping on the voice clips we've chosen from the nation's sound archive, all of which can be listened to in full at imuseum.im. The Isle of Man, like other countries caught up in the bloody conflict, experienced the Second World War at home and overseas. The vivid memories retold to us by those who fought, defended, were interned, or simply witnessed events are powerful and authentic. None more so than in this 1989 interview with Lieutenant Colonel Brian Milcreast, who described answering the call in August 1939 at the drill hall, Douglas, a week before war was declared.
It's hard to remember. I mean, when you're 21, 22, and suddenly you're off, you're it's all the nitty-gritty things. Have I got everything I want? Is the uniform okay?
And there probably wasn't much time to think about it. If it was only 4 or 5 hours, you wouldn't have time to think.
That's right.
Things you were thinking
that's
about.
Right. So anyway, we you put together what you think you need, and you can't take a lot of stuff with you, obviously, So we went down to the drill hall, and the interesting thing was that as the men came in from all over the island, there was no accommodation at the drill hall, so the arrangement was that we would go down and get on the boat in Douglas Harbour and stay on it overnight. So we went down. We slept on the ship, and then 9 o'clock the following morning off we went. That was the way it went.
So what was it like when you'd actually left? There was a huge amount of anticipation, I would imagine.
Well, everybody was very supportive. You know what the Manx people are like. They were curious. Everybody knew what was going on. So, of course, as we were gathering together at the drill hall to go down to the ship, the crowds were developing and gave us a good cheer as we marched in groups down to the boat, and then when we sailed off at 9 o'clock on the ordinary morning sailing to Liverpool, this was a week before the war was declared, you see, so it was still reasonably peaceful sort of situation. They gave us a good cheer, and off we went to Liverpool on the morning boat.
3 years later, Brian found himself with the Manx Regiment manning anti-aircraft guns at the Battle of El Alamein, which turned the Desert War in favour of the Allies, but not without dreadful cost.
You see, the thing about being shot at or bombed or whatever, you never think that you're the one that's going to be hit. I mean, that's the first thing. If you thought, I'm going out to commit suicide, you wouldn't do it anyway. And I can remember, an incident that happened to me personally. I mean, in July of 1942, we were in the Alamein position before the battle, and we were being attacked by Stuka bombers on this particular day in July, and I can remember seeing these planes come over, and I was looking at them through my binoculars, and I said to the lads, I was quite near one of the guns, I said, these are for us, you better get onto them, you see. So we started firing at the guns. Well, and of course the next thing I knew was that the bombs had landed on top of us, really. I mean, because the Stuka bombers, they dive vertically, you see, and they make a hell of a noise, and as they dive, the fellow points the plane at what he's attacking, and then he pulls the plug and drops the bomb. So it's pretty accurate stuff. Anyway, by the time the dust had settled, I'd been hit, and another couple of chaps had been hit, and two of the lads were killed. But you don't your reaction is interesting, really, because you first of all say, well, I'm alive, you know, and the instinct is to survive. You don't actually relate to the chaps who've been killed. You say, oh, you know, that's rough or something. You don't. You have to get on with it, you know. And I mean, I was carted off, but the chaps who were there, I mean, I heard afterwards, you know, they just picked themselves up, and you have to go through the business, obviously, of burying the chaps who've been killed, and then replace them and patch the gun up if it's damaged, and you get on with it.
Get on with it, they did, and you can hear more of how on imuseum.im. Poignantly, years later, at El Alamein, when the dust had settled on graves and the guns had fallen silent, Brian visited the cemetery.
We went to Alamein, to the Imperial War Graves, the cemetery there, the wonderful place. And I was able to find these two lads, you see, Condon and Harding from Castletown. And I found their graves, and, you know, all those years later. But I looked at the heading, you know, and of course it brought it home immediately, because one was 22 and the other was 23, you know. That's the way it was.
It wasn't only on foreign soil Manx men were prepared to fight. Within a week of the call in May 1940, around 1,500 men had enlisted in the Isle of Man Home Guard, and it was in 1969, the 25th anniversary of its disbandment, that Manx Radio recorded our own Dad's Army. Here are T.R. Moore, Major Grove and Norman Crowe, armed at first only with a walking stick, an armband and a wonderful spirit.
And I can well remember the first evening we were put up on a post overlooking the Peel Bay from the top of the Cow. There were two of us put up there. All we had was a walking stick and an armband. And it was a beautiful June evening, of course, warm weather. And I remember Mr. Howie coming round as the inspecting officer to see we were at our posts. And he said, now, are you two boys all right up here? We said, yes, I think we'll be all right. Well, he says, I'm all right because I've got a revolver. Well, I said, have you got any ammunition? He said, oh, no.
Just the revolver, no ammunition. But this was really how it started in those early days, wasn't it?
This is how it started. It was started very suddenly as the local defence volunteers, of course, an armband and a walking stick. But being on an island in the centre of the Irish Sea, I think we were one of the first, really, to become very, very well equipped as a Home Guard unit.
In the very early days, I went to Selby, where the local platoon was known as Selby Cossacks. And the General Commanding Western Command came with Colonel Scott. The men were dressed in demons, they just had rifles, and their drill was simply awful. There was one man, an ex-Navy man, who was just 5'1" high, was 4'11" round his stomach. And we cut down the largest size of demons and cut them down a foot so that he wasn't stamping on them. The general saw the drill, turned to Colonel Scott and said, well, I don't think very much of their drill. Colonel Scott said, well, sir, he said, they can shoot and they can fight. So the general said, well, if that's so, I can soon test their shooting. I'm going to give a cup for the whole of the Western Command, 100 battalions competing. 6 months later, we shot for the cup. The 1st Battalion were first, the 2nd Battalion was second, the whole of Western Command. My vain recollections of these, they're very, very vivid. That we had the most wonderful spirit. We had young, we had old, we had from people from every walk of life. Just at Mackle, we had one boy of 15 who said he was 17. We had an old man who, when we came to sign forms saying people must be under 65, I said, you must be more than that. You've got both South African War medals. He said, yes. He said, I was a sergeant in 1890. And I said, how old are you? He said, I don't know. He said, I've lost my birth certificate. But 50. He said, I feel much under 65. I said, right, sign on the dotted line, you're in.
Oh yes, on occasion it was quite laughable. I remember on one occasion, for instance, we had at that time an elderly retired policeman from over the water who was a very diligent member of the Home Guard, and he was a sergeant at that time. And that evening there was an alert and the sirens had gone, and he was running up and down the village shouting, "Guard, turn out," with a loaded shotgun in his hands, and probably there was just as much danger from him as there would have been at that time from an invasion.
From an attack.
Probably, yes.
One can almost hear Lance Corporal Jones cry, "Don't panic!" Sound recordings on imuseum.im sometimes contain a dark comic humour, common at times of war and in the direst of situations. In June 1940, Captain Harry Kinley from Colby, aboard the Isle of Man steam packet vessel the Viking, helped evacuate 1,800 children from Guernsey ahead of the Nazis' occupation. It was a sight he'd never forget when he spoke about it in 1996 to Manx National Heritage.
Anyway, then into St. Peter's Port, alongside the jetty. It's a beautiful place. And here's a sight you'll never forget. There's a barracks come across up to the top of the quay like that, right over with the quay. Beyond that, then there's about 1,800 children, 1,700 odd children. Some thought it was wonderful. They had a gas mask and a little copper pot and some sandwiches. Half of them were eaten by that. Then beyond that, then, about 50 yards or more beyond them, there's barbed wire, and the parents were there, you see. Well, some kids were crying their hearts out. And I thought they were in a wonderful time, running around, you see. Well, that's all those children, nearly 1,800, and the odd nun and the odd people. But while we were loading these children, something rather funny, humorous again, a woman came staggering aboard, you see. "Hello, officer," she said. "Do you want the key? It's the key of my pub," she said. It was called Mrs. Savage, anyway. It was called the Bull's Head or something like that, you see. And you can have it, but I'm not going to give it to that bloody Hitler, she said. Oh, it's the captain. Yes, the captain rides and the lady would like to speak to you. What is it? It's like, he wants us to give you a pub.
So far we've heard from the men. Time we heard from the women, starting with Pamela Clark, who in 1940 was Private Bradley of the Auxiliary Territorial Service, sent in the summer of 1940 to train as a Y signals operator for 6 months at Palace Camp, Douglas. It was all very secret.
Well, Private Bradley, I don't know what you are going to do because it's all very secret, but you are going to be a Y signals operator. And I don't know anything about it, I can't tell you, but you will find out where you go. I don't know where you're going when you're posted. And that was it. And when the posting actually came, to my joy and delight, I found it was to the Isle of Man. And having been told about the secrecy, I rang up my parents from Scotland and I said, "I'm being posted to the place where we last went for our holidays." And I thought, well, the Germans could work that one out.
Pamela describes a typical relentless day learning Morse code.
We're up early. I thought it was early anyway. It was probably about 7 o'clock. And paraded, had breakfast in the hydro. Which was our dining quarters. And then we were marched to our hotel for the morning's work. And once we got in the set room, it was relentless. We put the earphones on our head and we were taught Morse by the signals. The instructor would say, "This is A, didar," and this is N, dardit. And he would just make us listen to those sounds, you see. And eventually, as we progressed, we were listening to the sounds. He would talk to us whilst we were listening. He would put music on. He would ask us questions because he wanted the signal to come from the brain to the hand without us thinking. And as we were going to take messages in code, This was an advantage because we wouldn't guess what the next letter was going to be. I found that I couldn't take English Morse because I would be thinking, oh, A-N and the next letter's D. And you see, it might not have been, it might have been another, not and. And the advantage of this was that as it was all going to be sent to, when we were actually on duty, that it was going to be sent to Bletchley Park, Station X. We must get every letter right, because otherwise it would gum up the Enigma machines.
The Isle of Man can lay proud claim to training women who later passed intercepted enemy communications to Bletchley Park. The rest, as they say, is history. After the Isle of Man, Pamela went to work as a Y signals operator in Harrogate, but she always remembered fondly her time spent training in Douglas.
Being on the Isle of Man, particularly as I arrived in the summer, it was wonderful because we could just at the end of the day slip across the road and go and have a dip in the sea. We thought we were in paradise. The island was blacked out, of course, but there was plenty of dances, and there was a wonderful naffy somewhere in Douglas. I can't remember where it was. Cinemas, dancing, and because we were all boys and girls of 18, 19, 20, that's all, and all of the same level of education, it was just wonderful. It was a wonderful camp, Palace Camp. It was a wonderful camp.
That word camp meant something very different to the thousands of Germans and Italians living in Britain upon the outbreak of war, who were arrested and sent to the Isle of Man. Sisters Rosemary and Anita Dalheim, aged 15 and 12, arrived with their mother and baby sister in Douglas from their home in Hull on the 29th of May 1940. Here in these short clips, taken from a much longer 1994 interview on imuseum.im, they recall their experience from arrival to staying in a Port Erin boarding house with other women internees, to the reaction of the locals.
Then we walked out and all along the quayside to the railway station.
It's quite a long walk, isn't it?
The Manx people were lined up. And
what was the master race?
And this one man, he said it. Huh! I mean, I heard it, and nobody else. He just said when we passed. Huh! He said, look at.
He took one look at us. Not these visage, but not very different.
They call themselves the master race. Oh, and it made me so cross. At first you accept it, and then later on the ruction started. Who she thinks she is, and Germans are very, very class conscious. Very class conscious. Die Person,
Yeah, so is she telling me to put my knitting somewhere else?
And so then the rows started. And it's all in my diary. M slapped K and K slapped so.
We were a god, we'd never seen behaviour like that.
We heard language we never knew existed. These women screeching at each other. Our family kept out of it.
No, just women who'd left the kitchen dirty or who hadn't done their duty with hanging up the tea towels. Petty.
Just silly things.
What did the locals think about you going into a shop and buying?
Oh, they
had good business. They would have normally been the end of season.
See,
they were all good.
It was just,
you wanted to talk to Mona and all the people.
Yes, for us it was just normal living. I mean, you go with your mother, she'd say you need some new shoes, you go to a shoe shop, you buy. It was so free, it was like being on holiday. We were just, and we could walk from Port Erin to Port
They probably just looked upon us as extended holiday makers.
So there's no animosity there at all?
Never.
Well, not that we noticed, ever.
Mona Quillen was one local instructed to take in internees at her boarding house in Port St Mary. Although most of those interned were not sympathetic to the Nazi cause, in this interview with Manx National Heritage curator Matthew Richardson in 2004, she described how in the back kitchen she challenged the views of one female internee.
She used to come into the back kitchen, when you'd be getting me, and she'd stand behind you and she'd say, oh, Hitler'll be in the Tower of London next week.
And she meant that quite seriously.
Yes.
Yes,
and there was another one, I can't think. Was it Kentoverch? She's from East Prussia, I think. She'd been working in this school too, and she had rather strong sympathies
So how did you answer back when she said something
well,
like
I
that?
stuck my chin out and said, not in your life.
The lived experience of Second World War internment in the Isle of Man speaks through the voices of those who were there. This is the start of a talk by Dr. Klaus Hinrichsen, an internee at Hutchinson Square Camp Douglas, recorded at the Manx Museum in 1991. The words barbed wire and bugle plunge us into a time of war.
50 years ago, to the day, I wrote this letter to my future wife in London. My address was P Camp, Hutchinson Square Internment Camp, Douglas, Isle of Man. I could not write very fast with a fountain pen, as the fold and tuck in letter had been heavily coated with some glossy substance which would disclose my use of any invisible ink. I counted the lines. I was only allowed 24 lines, and I was not supposed to write very small or very compressed letters. Once finished, my letter would have to be read by the military censor, who was already snowed under by incoming and outgoing mail. And it would take a long time to reach the person to whom it was meant to be sent. This time, nothing had been blotted out, and the censor put his label onto it, examiner number 55408. I wrote in German. The intelligence officer had posted a note in the camp saying, I prefer your letters being written in German. That I can understand. Your English I cannot. Looking up, I saw a stockade of barbed wire, 10 foot high, and beyond it a soldier in battle fatigue with tin helmet and a bayonet mounted on his rifle, patrolling a small stretch of a rectangular compound known as Hutchinson Square, which housed 1,500 male internees. All were German and Austrian nationals. Soon the bugle would sound to call me to the evening roll call outside my house, to be counted and recounted again. It never tallied.
Victory in Europe happened in the early hours of the 8th of May, 1945. Ida Arden remembers getting up and joining the crowds on Douglas Promenade. It was a night to remember.
Now, when the war was declared over, it happened late at night, or should I say in the early hours of the morning. Oh boy, that was wonderful. We all got up and dressed and ran down the road to the promenade. We had dancing and singing, and the boats were blowing the hooters, church bells were ringing, everybody was singing and dancing, until we went home about 8 o'clock next morning. It was a night that we'll never forget. There was hundreds and hundreds of people on the promenade. Some of them out in their night dresses even. They didn't bother to get dressed, they just put dressing gowns on them. And there was even two pianos rolled out onto the promenade. It was just wonderful, it was, to think that the world was at peace once again. And our boys would be coming home, brothers and husbands. Oh, it was a wonderful time.
We started this programme with the memories of Lieutenant Colonel Brian Milcreast, so it feels fitting to end with those from another Manx Regiment veteran, John Stevenson. John fought on Crete, where he was taken prisoner by the Germans. His account of the dive bombing by Stukas is vivid and terrifying.
Fate has a strange thing, but we stopped once at the Stukas had come over. You know about the Stukas. They were dive bombers that dived down, and they had special equipment on that whistled, that frightening. And they used to release their bombs as they dived and then pull out. And we dived into this wood to sort of get cover more than anything else. And this chap pulled up behind us on my bike, and that's the last I saw of him. and he's now buried on Crete, but I don't know what happened to him, but, you know, it could have been me. Oh, that was it. So eventually we walked, we had to abandon again, all the wagons, everything was abandoned, and we walked most of the 40 miles over the mountains to Svarkir, and we had to hide in the caves during the day because the Germans were back and forward with their fighter planes looking for strafing and bombing and whatever, and then each night we had to go down to the beach to await the Navy coming in to take us off. And we were actually on the water's edge when Colonel came along and said, well, I'm sorry, gentlemen, they're not taking any more off, and tomorrow we'll be surrendering to the Germans. So that was it.
Heartwarming is his recollection of finally making it home to his family in Ballasalla after the war. It must have been a scene of return repeated throughout the island, one tinged with joy, relief and shock.
The captain of I think it was the Russian castle we came on, the boat, the captain said, now they'll have a welcoming party there with the band and everything. And I said, well, we don't want any fuss. We just want to get home. I said, okay. He said, I'll see that you don't, which we didn't. My mother and father and sisters were there to meet us, and they didn't have cars then, and I remember going on the bus, and I can always remember, I lived in Ballasalla then, I don't know whether you know Ballasalla. Well, you know where the pub is.
Yeah.
Well, the post office on the right then. We got off the bus and we walked down, and just as I reached the corner, a girl who was at school the same time as who lived just near me anyway, she just saw me, she burst into tears. I thought, well, I'm not that bad, surely. I don't know whether it was shock or seeing, because I was thin and dreadfully thin.
Thanks for listening to Voices from the Second World War. Join us again next week for Holiday Voices from Unlocking Our Sound Heritage, or in the meantime, listen again on the podcast available on the Manx Radio website. You can visit imuseum.im and click on Unlocking Our Sound Heritage to listen to these and many more sound recordings from the Manx National Heritage Sound Archive. To find out more about the charity Manx National Heritage and how you can support us, visit our website, manxnationalheritage.im, or join us on Facebook.